Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be a weekend review. We're going to go through the top 10 for the weekend of October 5th through the 7th, which is today. We'll do some deeper dives on Venom and A Star is Born, which were the two new wide release openers. Talk a little bit about some holdovers, some limited releases, and then sort of discuss what's going to happen over the next few weeks at the box office. So let's dive right into it. Coming in at number one, to nobody's, well, a little bit of a surprise, I guess. Is it really a surprise? I don't know. There was some contention going into the weekend about how well Venom was actually going to perform. Those very negative reviews, 32% in Rotten Tomatoes, the disastrous PR campaign that was going on. Thomas Hardy's basically saying that they cut all the good parts out of the film. Michelle Williams, who co-stars, saying, I basically just did this for the money. Obviously, she's more of an indie sort of actress. And so it was not there were not good vibes going into Thursday and Friday. But it performed. Like when the preview numbers came in at 7.5 really early on deadline. This was Thursday night. I think that was only based on East Coast numbers. And it actually rose to 10 million by actuals by the time Friday morning came around. So something was happening almost immediately with some sort of undercounting and some wrong projections sort of skewing towards below what it was actually doing. We were seeing that even earlier, I think, with the tracking. There was a little bit of a blind spot, I think, for Venom, and I certainly didn't see this coming at all. I believe I got to go back and look at my fall movie preview numbers really quick. But I was expecting, at most 50. Hollywood Stock Exchange had a consensus of about 51 for the opening weekend of Venom. That was earlier this fall. I was saying lower. I was saying 45, and I revised that down to 42. So clearly I completely missed Venom this go around and did not really see what the audience was for this film. And what I was basing that on was the marketing was terrible. It looked like a comic book movie that was coming out in the early 2000s, late 90s. It almost had a pre-X-Men feel to it. And if you know what I mean, X-Men came out in 2000, then Spider-Man in 2002. That was really the start of this generation and era of comic book movies, which has been one of the most exciting and interesting sort of genres ever in film. I mean, it's just been outrageous how well these movies have performed over the last almost 20 years now. Before X-Men, there were comic book movies. They just weren't very good. You had your Batman, you had your really, older Superman type stuff, but like a lot of this stuff was just Elektra, like Spawn. It was always considered kind of like horror movies, just this little niche gutter where if you did a good movie, it would do okay, but it wasn't going to break 200 million domestic. Like this wasn't going to happen. And obviously that all changed in the early 2000s. But even in, we had Catwoman in like, what was that, 2002? And maybe Elektra was in the 2000s. Actually, I'm thinking about it now. Yeah, I think it was. So there was just this subpar quality to comic book movies before MCU really came along. And then in 2008, when Iron Man happened, that really did change that genre, I think, for good. And Venom just sort of seemed like it was hearkening back towards that pre-MCU time. And the quality of the CGI looked terrible. The movie just looked like a complete mess. And you know what? I think that it is. Critics have agreed with that viewpoint with a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes. So there are a lot of indicators that this wasn't going to do well, but those indicators were wrong, right? Venom has extremely overperformed here. Now, the consensus was probably 50-ish. I think tracking was saying around 50, 55. The fact that it's basically broken 80 here, and that's probably with the Sunday here is estimated by Sony, and it is a holiday weekend technically in the United States. Monday is Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, wherever you live in the States. So Sunday might be a little bit bigger than normal. I doubt when the actuals come in that it's going to be at 80. I would expect it at 78, 79. That being said, it is an extreme overperformance here by Venom. And one has to wonder, okay, this is let's pull up the matrix of immediate postmortems for films, why this stuff happens, or at least try to get a better understanding of why it happened, because there were so many indicators that this was not going to go well. The real big red flag to me wasn't necessarily the reviews coming in or the really lame marketing. I think for me it was that PR campaign. And if you saw any of the interviews and stuff like that, it just seemed like they didn't want to be there, and like they were kind of maybe embarrassed by the film. But that didn't really matter here. So the question is, okay, if we just sort of take a step back and like think about the four main qualities of a film and how we can measure them, right? With product quality here, it's terrible. It's not a good movie. Now you might have fun, it might be entertaining, but from an art perspective or a product perspective, it's really not that good. Audience reactions were much, much better than critical reactions, but that doesn't necessarily change the quality of the movie. It's not a good product. Product conception would be another sort of vertical look at or element to look at in this movie. I mean, it's Venom. Venom's a huge character in the Spider-Man universe, even though like Sony keeps on saying it has nothing to do with Spider-Man. It's just so bizarre. What are they doing? I don't get it. They're trying to build like they're trying to build like a second parallel universe to MCU. There's like MCU, Spider-Man verse, and then Venom verse. Like, come on, it's so absurd. Most of the people went to go see this movie because of it's in the Spider-Man realm. I mean, Fandango did a survey of 1,000 people, and I think 80% said 90% said, hey, I'm really excited to see Venom take on Spider-Man. So obviously that's not the case. So the product conception here makes sense. There's a big audience, a built-in audience that has been around for a good 20 years. I don't know when Venom premiered in the comic books. I remember I was really into comic books when that character came about. And it was cool. It was a really fascinating character. But there is a built-in, sort of baked-in audience here. So the conception is fine. The quality obviously has some problems. Marketing-wise, the quantity was certainly there. This thing was a deluge of TV spots and online marketing for this. So Sony did a fantastic job with just inundating people with this movie. The marketing quality I thought was pretty shoddy across the board. The trailers weren't very good. They weren't very engaging, but the main trailer had like 100 million views, I want to say, or something crazy, maybe like 50 million views. So all the indicators that I see, would say to me like, this is probably going to underperform. And that's why I chose it opening at 42. But that's not what happened. So it's interesting to try and pick out, why this did so well. And think in terms of just, if you look at the cinema score, B+ from the audience, which is okay. Amazing Spider-Man 2 got a B+. Justice League got a B+. Spider-Man 3 got a B+. Suicide Squad got a B+. Batman vs. Superman got a B. Those are the comparisons that Deadline brought up. And I think those are very apt comparisons because it's a comic book movie that isn't good. If I'm using critics' viewpoint objectively as a group of people who study film and write about film, they say this is not a good movie. But the audiences are sort of not necessarily super excited about seeing the movie in terms of their reaction. It's sort of like, yeah, it was okay. That's what a B+ really says. And if you compare, like a Justice League, everybody knows Justice League is a terrible movie. Suicide Squad, everybody knows that it's a terrible movie, and they both got B+. So I think Venom, in the long run, is going to fall in that sort of pot of movies where it's like, yeah, I went to go see it, but it's not very good. Or I went to go see it and I didn't fall asleep. I had a good time, but it's not a good movie. And those tend to not age very well. Like if you talk to somebody about Spider-Man 3, the look on your face, they're going to be like, oh, just disgust. I actually just watched Spider-Man 3 for the first time. And it's funny because I wasn't really into those movies back then. I remember going to see Spider-Man 2 opening weekend in 2004, and I knew right then, in that moment, I remember sitting there in the theater, I think I was in Minneapolis, and being surrounded by these people. It's totally packed house Friday night, and everybody's just like super into it and loving it, and I was like, what the F is this? Like, it just didn't, the comic book movie genre has never really connected to me, with me. Outside some examples like Logan or Deadpool, and maybe the more out there versions of it, I really like. Wonder Woman, I enjoyed as well. But for the most part, have never really been super into them. When I saw Spider-Man 3, I was kind of like, this doesn't really surprise me that much. Like, this is what comic book movies always were to me. It's sort of like very playful, very kind of out there, cliche-ridden plots, poor writing, even worse acting, cool set pieces and stuff like that, but not much more than that going on. So when I finally saw Spider-Man 3, I wasn't that disgusted by it. I was like, this sort of seems exactly what I expected. But you talk to any comic book movie fan, you compare Spider-Man 3 versus like Avengers Infinity War, and they're like a different medium of art. I mean, they're totally different. And I get the feeling that Venom means something a lot. It's something different for people who are perhaps over 30 versus people who are under 30. I think people under 30 don't necessarily remember when comic book movies were terrible, and they weren't good at all, which is the case until about X-Men and Spider-Man in 2002. And Venom feels really at home with that group of movies. And I think younger people, because they just don't have that historical context, they didn't have to live through the late 90s and go see Spawn at the movie theater and pay like $12 or whatever it was back then, probably like $5 back then, and they don't have that baggage, that history. So the Venom to them kind of feels new and something kind of odd. Whereas if I had to go see Venom, I'd be like, I've seen this movie 20 times, like I don't want to see it again. So and we noticed that a little bit. The audience breakdown was actually a pretty typical breakdown in terms of age. 32% was under 25, 68% was over 25. That's actually what an average movie does. That's the average ticket buying group of people. In terms of other turnout information here that we can kind of glean, 36% white, which is much lower than the average movie. Usually it's at about 55% white, or Caucasian, if you will. The Latino audience for Venom was a little bit over-indexed at 27%. Usually it's 23% for the average movie. 12% African-American is the average. Venom was 19%. So an Asian audience for Venom was 11%. Kind of the average film was about 7%. So you see that Caucasian audience was depressed, and we saw some over-indexing in the Latino, African-American, and Asian audiences. And so there's not really a huge indicator here as to why this broke out as much as it did. I honestly don't know. Post-track numbers, 4 stars out of 5, which is pretty good. 80% overall positive, which is great. The only thing that sort of sticks out to me in sort of looking at the audience was that it was 68% male versus 32% female in terms of ticket buyers. And I think they probably took that on Saturday or Friday. So it might be a little bit skewed towards an earlier audience. The only thing I pick out there is that that's way over indexed on males. Usually you have a 51 male, 49% female as sort of your average audience that goes to a movie. Here, the males were pushing 70% versus about 32% for females. So it played very much with the male crowd, but the fact that it wasn't. Now, if you told me that this was gonna make $80 million like a week ago, and you asked me why do you think that happened, I would have said that the younger audiences really showed up for it. That's what I would have said. I would have said the under 25 was like 40%. And it really played well with teenagers and stuff like that. But that didn't happen. So I don't really know. I'm kind of clueless right now as to why this did so well. Going to like anecdotal stuff of what I sort of read and have been reading about over the last couple of weeks about it, it seemed to be that even like people who follow the box office that are really into this stuff didn't think it was going to do that well. There just wasn't really any indication that this was going to break out in the way that it has. So it just goes to show you that, there's massive blind spots when we think about the box office and analyzing what happens. I don't have a clue right now as to why this did so well. It did almost $19,000 per theater, which is really good. And it was in a lot of theaters. It was in 4,250 theaters. The nice thing about this too for Sony is this will help kick off or spawn, if you will, some other movies in the sort of the Sony comic book universe with this performance. And I think even you look at the budget here. The budget here was only $100 million. Usually for movies like this, you're talking at least 150, 200, at least. For an MCU movie, I don't think they shoot them for under $200 million anymore. So it's a great performance. It's noted that it needs to do about $450 million globally to break even. That's sort of the rumor coming out of the studios or the industry. I mean, if we just extrapolate on what we have right now, so you're looking at 80 here domestically for the opening weekend. It is of poor quality, and I think the word of mouth is not going to be fantastic, despite that. I mean, the B+ cinema score, that's the same thing as Justice League, so it's like whatever. And Suicide Squad. So I feel like the multiplier here is not going to be 3. I think it's probably going to be closer to about 2.5, I would guess. So that puts it right at $200 million domestically. In terms of what that is going to be overall, this is playing very, very well internationally, like super well internationally. So I'm going to assume that the domestic take here, which is US and Canada, I'm going to assume it's probably going to top out at like 35%. That's definitely kind of a guess or shot in the dark, but it's not going to be, I think it's going to be lower than 40% of the total take. So you're looking at like 570, let's say like $600 million total internationally, or worldwide, I should say. So Sony's going to be very happy with this performance. It's going to make a nice little chunk of change in terms of profit, if it doesn't collapse or something, but I don't really see that happening. I don't think it's going to do all that well in the subsequent weekends here coming up in the US, but internationally, I don't think the quality is going to hurt it all that much. So, a really big surprise, and I must say it's the biggest opening weekend in October ever. I think the recent, I think the record holder before this was Gravity, maybe, and I have to look that up because I don't know. Let's check that out really quick. Yeah, before it was Gravity, and then The Martian, and Paranormal Activity 3. We've had a lot of movies in October opened in the 50s, 40s range. Gravity was 55. Martian was essentially 55 too. Paranormal Activity was 52. Jackass 3D was 50. So this, Venom smashes those records, which isn't really all that surprising because one thing we've noticed over the last few years is that quieter months have just been able to launch big films. February is the perfect example, which was a pretty quiet month until about 3 or 4 years ago. And now it's a really massive month because of Black Panther and Deadpool and stuff like that. March as well. March has always been really big because of the Easter holiday, but now I feel like March, almost like February, March is like its own mini like summer holiday sort of part of the year. You can launch a huge tentpole movie in February and March now, where I didn't feel like that was really the case, 5-10 years ago. But now October is open season for massive blockbusters. This $80 million performance is special and it's unique. And I am surprised. I am surprised across the board about it. And I'm obviously we're going to follow this closely over the next few weeks and see how much it's going to drop next weekend. My guess is that because of the quality here, and even when you look at a B+ cinema score, the problem with that is that's opening night audiences. So that's like the male fanboys that show up to go see it Friday night. Is that going to be? Are they going to show up on a Wednesday? Is there going to be a big audience on a Thursday, next Thursday? So my impression is that because the movie isn't all that good and it's kind of a mess, my guess is it's going to have a massive drop next weekend. I'm thinking at least 60% drop. Maybe even higher than that, like 65. But we'll see what happens with that one. But there's nothing you can really say to take away from this. I mean, it is an outrageously good performance for Venom. Almost double what I thought it was going to do. And a good 25 million more than what tracking was saying. So I think Sony is very happy today with the performance of Venom. So that was number 1 this weekend. Number 2 was A Star Is Born from Warner Brothers. That did 41.2 million. It actually might be higher than that. I know there's some weird contention about the preview numbers for this movie. A Star is Born had some special, I think early in the week, like Tuesday, Wednesday previews where you went or something and got the CD. I don't know if these are counted in that because I've heard 42.6 million also, so closer to 43. But in any event, a fantastic performance for A Star is Born. It was in about 3,700 theaters. Per theater average was a very strong $11,200 for A Star is Born. Now this one was not on my radar, obviously, when I did the fall movie preview, and I think every episode since then I've sort of just already pre-apologized for my terrible guess that happened in August when I did that preview show. I guessed $17 million for the opening, but my more recent updated guess was 45, so I'm actually really close with the updated one. The consensus going into the fall with Hollywood Stock Exchange was about 24 million. Now, keep in mind, all of those really off guesses were before Toronto and before Venice. And if I had guessed after those two film festivals, I would have been like, yeah, it's going to do 40 or $50 million. Why is that? The response to this movie has been nothing short of phenomenal from critics and audiences alike. 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is a film, Bradley Cooper's first film he's ever directed, but obviously he's worked in the industry for so long, so he has a good sort of foundation with which to sort of jump into directing. Obviously Lady Gaga as the star. This is a movie that has been remade every few generations, or once every generation, you could say. 8 out of 10 as the actual score from critics, which is a very high audience score of an 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, which you take with a grain of salt. What a little bit more accurate is going to be that A cinema score for A Star is Born, which is great. 90% on post-track and 4.5 stars out of 5 on post-track. So audiences love it. Critics love it. It's got a huge... is Bradley Cooper like A-list? Probably close to A-list. But I think more importantly is Lady Gaga playing the sort of the other lead here has drawn in all of her massive fan base from her pop stardom have come out to see this movie. In terms of who did show up, female to male ratio was 66% to 34, so way over indexed on the female audience compared to an average group of moviegoers. They both gave it an A cinema score. The only group that gave it something higher than A was actually under 25-year-olds. So that the youth group here really was ecstatic about this film. Another thing to note, so we're really over-indexed on the female audience, also over-indexed very significantly on the over 25 audience. So normally it's like 67-33, over 25 is about 67% of the average movie-going audience. Here was 86%. The under 25 audience was pretty minuscule at only about 14%. It should usually be about a third of an audience. Here was only 14%. I think even more interesting was the significantly older audience. Over 50-year-olds were 42% of this audience. In normal, they're only supposed to be about, the average movie-going audience, about 28%. So the sort of top line to that is A Star is Born skewed way feminine and way older. And when looking at the sort of racial breakdown of the audiences, we see more sort of skewed numbers here. 69% was white, normal movie, 55%. Hispanic audience or Latino audience was 17%. Average movie-going audience of Latinos is usually 23%. African American was 4%. Normal audience is 12%. And Asian audience was right in line with the averages. So you can see what happened here. This is playing really well with older people, white folks, and females. And that sort of falls in line probably with our expectations for this. Now, what does that mean? Also played very well in big cities on the coast. New York and Los Angeles were massive for this movie. Middle of the country, not as strong. So what does that mean for this movie and where is it going? Because it is playing older and the type of film that it is, it's one of those movies where It's going to have great word of mouth because critics love it and audiences love it. Older audiences movies that have older audiences like book club tend to play well longer because older people don't rush out to see movies opening weekend necessarily. They'll wait till Tuesday or Wednesday or 2 weeks from now. So A Star is Born is going to have great legs. It's made 42.6 so far. The baseline for this is 3x. It'll absolutely do 3x multiples. So you're looking at $126 million domestically. That's the bottom for this. Now, what does the ceiling look like? I think the ceiling is probably 4x, if not higher. And here's why I say that. 4x would put it at, 170 about. I feel like it could go even higher than that because it's released here in early October. We're just at the start of Oscar movie season. First Man comes out next week. That's probably going to get a Best Picture nom. This also might get a Best Picture nom. A Star is Born is obviously going to win one of the Oscars for Best Original Song. It's going to happen. The thing about this is a film like this can play for a month, no problem. 2 months, pretty easily, it's going to stick it out. That 3 month mark. So if we go 2 months from now, where are we? We're in early December. And if it can stick it out through early December and stay in theaters once we hit Christmas, this thing is going to have insanity legs. And because if it can survive through Christmas, it's going to hit Oscar season. I don't know when the Oscars are this year. Usually they're like February or like late February. It's going to get another bump when those Oscar nominations come out, which I think is the second week of January. So they really timed this release quite well. I think I would even consider thinking like 6x multiplier, which will put it in like the $250 million range. That sounds kind of outrageous based on a $41 million opening. But my guess is it's going to go over 200. I think it's just going to have fantastic legs. Everybody loves it. The word of mouth is going to be off the charts. Every single old person in the United States is going to see this. So I think it's a wonderful performance for this movie from Warner Brothers. Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper, a lot of awards probably come on their way. This is probably the best performance they could have asked for this movie. So we'll keep an eye on Star is Born. My guess is a sub 50 drop, guaranteed next weekend. I'm thinking probably about a 40%. I'm thinking a 30 to 40% drop. And I think those drops are going to continue because of the type of film it is over the next few months, or a few weeks, I should say. Okay, so that was 1 and 2. In terms of like, I thought A Star is Born might beat Venom. I mean, if my original Venom prediction was even remotely close, that could have happened. It might have happened. But Venom just obviously blew it out of the water, doubled what A Star is Born made. And so I was definitely wrong about that. But that's kind of like a month ago. That's, I think, what people thought was going to happen. Like Venom's going to be a really big movie. Star is Born is going to do really well, but it's not in the same league as Venom. Okay, so that was 1 and 2. Number 3 was Smallfoot, holdover from last weekend. 35% drop, really good drop. $14.9 million for the weekend. $3,600 per theater average, which is okay for a second weekend. Total take so far is $42.7 million for Smallfoot. Decent performance here. The quality was like okay. It's not like Pixar quality. It's not getting the 90% Rotten Tomatoes. I think it's like 68, 69, somewhere in there. But not a lot of children's films, especially animated films, out right now. So that's a decent performance for that movie. If it keeps having drops like that, I think Warner Brothers is going to be pretty happy with its performance. Number 4 this weekend was Night School with $12.2 million. A really large 55% drop here. Now you could say, it's a rated R comedy. I think it was rated R. So they tend to have a little bit higher drop second weekend. This one is way too high compared to what I see the rest of the top 10. It's just, it's too high of a drop. I don't think it's going to play all that well for the long term. I think it was front loaded. And I see it continuing to have over 50% drops here on out, at least for the next couple of weeks. Total take so far for Night School, $46 million. It was only shot for $29 million. So despite this weekend kind of being a downer for that movie, I think overall it's gonna have a pretty good financial performance. Number 5 was The House with the Clock in Its Walls, a decent 42% drop, $7.3 million. for the weekend. Per theater average was just around $2,100. Total take so far for The House with the Clock on its Walls is $55 million on a budget of 42. This has been a strong performance in its third weekend now. Eli Roth has a winner here. Now, is it a huge breakout? No, it's not a huge breakout, but I think it's a good performance, and Universal is going to be satisfied with it. Coming in at number 6 this weekend was A Simple Favor from Lionsgate. This one has been the little movie that was released 4 weeks ago. It did $3.4 million this weekend. A pretty good 47% drop. It's starting to lose a large amount of theaters, lost 665 theaters this weekend. Per-theater average is okay at $1,500, actually closer to $1,400. But the total take so far for A Simple Favor is $49 million. I don't think Lionsgate would be upset at all with that, to be honest with you. I feel like it was a movie that was not marketed correctly, and it had a really kind of depressed opening. I think it went at like 16 or something like that. But it's had very good legs the last few weeks. Good word of mouth. Taylor Swift Snapchatted about it, so that always helps. I think in the long run here, I think it's going to be a good performance for A Simple Favor, and much better than they could have asked for, to be honest with you, with the way they marketed that film. So it has stuck around, and the word has gotten out that it's a pretty decent movie. And I think it's doing quite well. Number 7 this weekend was The Nun. Still sticking around, $2.6 million, 52% drop, lost over 1,000 theaters, starting a quicker descent out of the multiplex. Total take so far for The Nun in its 5th weekend is $113 million. So it has passed, I believe, all the other movies in the Conjuring series or universe. It's passed Annabelle 1 and 2. It's past Conjuring 2. I don't think it's going to reach the 130s where The Conjuring ended up at. It's for that movie in the context of what it is and how much it cost, it's a grand slam. Now, is it like the best horror movie ever made? No. Is it going to help that series of movies? Actually, no. It's going to hurt the Conjuring universe because it wasn't a really good movie, and a lot of people went out to go see it. I get the feeling a lot of people are kind of feeling a little bit burned by spending money to go see it in the theater because it wasn't great. But as I've mentioned, it's that first weekend or post Labor Day weekend in September that I've sort of hinted at being this horror weekend now ever since it did so well last year. And the reason that it wasn't a big weekend before is like it was post-holiday, Labor Day holiday. People were really getting back in swing of work and college and school and stuff like that. So September's usually quiet. That weekend never really took off that much, but it changed that when it opened up, well over $100 million. And I had suggested that, The Nun picked this. It's New Line. They're both New Line movies. I sort of suggested that was going to be a horror weekend for the foreseeable future. And next year, obviously, it too is coming out that weekend. But New Line just announced that for the next 3 years, I think until 2021 or 2022, that is staked out as the horror movie weekend. So I think, they've established a pattern there that it's all going to be, New Line, Warner Brothers movies, horror movies on that weekend. But that's now a new sort of like mini holiday or something. Whereas it's kind of similar to Valentine's Day, where Valentine's Day was like, oh yeah, it's a romantic movie sometimes, but it was never really like an exciting box office bonanza holiday. But ever since like Deadpool and now Black Panther, now I feel like Valentine's Day is like a really big day to see movies. And now this weekend, that first weekend after Labor Day in September, now that is a big day for movies, especially now for horror movies. So The Nun, another horror movie, number 8, Hellfest from Lionsgate, $2 million, 60% drop, sub $1,000 per theater, $900 per theater. This one just didn't take off. It's Lionsgate, CBS Films. It was a non-starter from the beginning. There was no hook. The marketing here was bad. No one had any idea what the hell it was about. It just was not. It was not well marketed because I don't think it was a really good film, and I think they just buried it and said, let's just put it out there and see what happens. And not much has happened. So 8.8 million so far. I don't know. It's kind of it's a non-interesting movie to talk about because it sort of just ended up being released. It wasn't something that I think Lionsgate or CBS Films really put any backing to, and that performance sort of indicates that. Number 9 was Crazy Rich Asians, still on the board here in the top 10. $2 million for the weekend, 50% drop, which is pretty good. It's starting to quicken its decline at the box office here. 800 theaters lost. Per theater average is still okay, though, $1,400 per theater. And obviously, I think one of the stars hosted SNL last night. So in its 8th weekend, Crazy Rich Asians is at $169 million. One of the biggest stories of the summer and the year so far at the box office. Warner Brothers is very happy about that. Warner Brothers has a really good year, actually. I'm just looking now. It's like, Star is Born's a huge hit. This one's a huge hit. The Meg was a huge kind of surprise hit. They've really had some great success in the last couple of months. Number 10, The Predator. Couldn't even make $1 million this weekend in its 4th weekend. This is a disaster. It dropped 77% this weekend. In its 4th weekend, it lost 1,300 theaters. Its per theater average was $550. The Predator is, I think, one of the bigger stories of the year now, especially this fall, or at least this fall, I should say. It was supposed to be, a big September sort of kickoff movie to the fall. Fox rebooting a huge sci-fi franchise with a good director, Shane Black. At least he can be a good director. Probably maybe a better writer. I'm not really sure. It seemed like a pretty good cast. Olivia Munn, that guy from Narcos, I don't remember his name. There was a lot going for this movie. And by the time it got released, there were some PR problems with Olivia Munn and shooting a scene with a certain person that clouded the PR campaign. So there was a kind of bad vibes going into this movie getting released. But I think, it's still The Predator. It's still Shane Black. It's still the cat. Like, it's still from Fox. Like, this should be a bigger deal than it is. And it just hit. Opening weekend was really kind of depressed versus expectations. And it has just fallen apart over the last couple of weeks. And this drop, 77% drop in a 4th weekend like this, is just terrible. And obviously Venom took a lot of its audience away. It's a very similar demographic, I would say. But we're not going to see another Predator movie for a long time, probably a decade, which makes sense. I mean, it was a disaster all around. The quality of the movie was very poor. I think I don't know if Venom's going to have the same sort of fate here, because Venom, obviously way overperformed its expectations, whereas The Predator performed below its expectations just in terms of opening weekend. But I do wonder if the quality or poor quality of Venom in terms of the reviews and word of mouth, I do wonder if that's not going to hurt that movie in the same way Predator was hurt by just not being a good movie and not being that interesting. And it has just collapsed here in its last couple of weekends. And it's honestly kind of sad to see. Like, it was one thing that opens kind of depressed because it's not a good movie and it slowly, gradually gets out of the box office. But this is just like, it didn't start strong and now it's just falling apart. So Predator number 10, below $1 million for the weekend, and it's 4th weekend. It's so bad. Also had a terrible drop was White Boy Rick. It lost about 1,100 theaters, so it dropped 76% as well. And that's the top 10. Now, a couple sort of limited releases to at least to mention. Free Solo, which is the movie I couldn't remember the name of last week, has been mentioned a lot in write-ups recently, just because it has opened so well on a small number of theaters. It did $500K this weekend on only 36 theaters. Its per theater average was almost $14,000 on 36 theaters. So that is performing quite well in limited release. Actually, it did about 13K per theater. What did 14K per theater was The Hate U Give, which also did about $500,000 on only a very similar number of screens as Free Solo. They're kind of competing with each other. Now, Free Solo is in its 2nd weekend. It's a documentary, I think, about free I don't free climbing, rock climbing. I think is apparently it's National Geographic. Apparently, it's very good. Obviously, The Hate You Give is something from Fox. It's kind of like a YA based story. I don't know how that $14K per theater is really going to translate on a wide release opening. It seems like it could do pretty well. But if it was like 20 or 30K per theater on that small number of theaters there, I don't know. It seems like it would indicate it would break out a little bit more. I'm not seeing a huge breakout here happening. Although some people have mentioned it in write-ups for the weekend. I don't really see it yet, but it's hard to judge on like 40 theaters. It's hard to say what averages are really going to pan out to. If it was 4 theaters, there's tons of data points that you can point to say, hey, this might really break out. With this small number of theaters, with like 40, I don't really know. But it's something we're going to keep an eye on. Free Solo, keep an eye on The Hate You Give, and follow those over the next few weeks. Colette is also out. It's been out for 3 weeks. This was like a big Sundance movie. Getting released by Bleecker Street. A lot of Oscar buzz, or at least some awards buzz for it. We're not really into Oscar season yet, so I can't say that with any certainty. Hasn't done very well. It's $1.2 million by its third weekend. Per theater average in 100 theaters is about $4,300. That's not going anywhere. What else? Old Man and the Gun, also a limited release. It's in its second weekend. Added 44 theaters this weekend, so it's in about 50. Per theater average was $7,800. Supposedly Robert Redford's last movie. That's probably not going anywhere either. Okay performance for what it is, but it's not going to break out. That one's from Fox Searchlight. Sisters and Brothers for Annapurna. It's in its third weekend. This isn't doing anything. It's going to struggle to make $1 million. Per theater average in 54 theaters is $3,800. Not a good performance by that at all. I think that's mostly it in terms of limited releases. There's this movie called Shine that got released in 600 theaters and did less than, how much did it do per theater? It did $360 per theater. I don't even know who put this out. GVN Releasing? I don't know. This is like, it's got to be like a Christian movie. The Fight Within, Sister Code, Armed, A Girl Like Grace. Yikes. Well, they're trying at least. You give them that. That movie's not doing anything at all. Okay. Enough about all this stuff. Let's sort of pack it all in here and to say what's happened this weekend. Venom really overperformed. Fantastic performance. Star is Born, wonderful performance as well. I don't think A Star is Born is going to go anywhere soon. Like, it's just going to keep playing in theaters probably to the end of the year, through award season. Venom, I think, is going to have some pretty severe drops next weekend just because the quality doesn't look like it's there. And everything else is kind of playing to expectations, with The Predator really having an awful performance in the last couple of weeks. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's coming out next weekend and the week after that. This weekend we have Bad Times at the El Royale. That was actually moved from this last weekend up a week. No idea how that's going to do. It's opening up in 2,800 theaters from Fox. I think it's noirish, probably LA-based. It might even be like a period piece. I don't know that much about it. I think I saw the trailer once. I don't think it's going to do all that well. There's not enough buzz there for that. It's probably a really good movie. It seems like it would be. I just don't feel like the marketing is there to support a breakout performance from that movie. Also opening is First Man. This could be huge. What do I have this listed at? My fall movie preview. Let's take a check. First Man I have listed at $35 million opening. I think I'm probably going to revise that down to about 30, just because it's coming out next week, and I haven't heard that much buzz recently for it. This week was really sucked up by Venom and A Star is Born, so maybe we'll see a lot more during the week, but I haven't seen a ton. So I'm going to revise my guess down to about $30 million. Going into the fall, consensus was about $21 million opening. This one is award Oscar bait. The whole movie is. And so if it's good enough, it might stick around for a long time. But the problem is it is kind of early for movies like this. A Star is Born really hit a grand slam because it opened very early in Oscar season. It did so well, it's just going to stick around for a long time. If First Man doesn't pop off in this opening weekend, it's going to have problems sticking around through the holidays. And if that happens, bye-bye awards. Like, you're probably not going to do all that well awards-wise. It's not even just like a specific number it has to hit in terms of box office. It's just the impression that the Academy voters have about a movie. Because like stuff like Moonlight won, not last year, but the year before, versus La La Land. Talking about Ryan Gosling here. But like Moonlight was gushed over by critics, and it did perform very well box office wise as to what it was. Didn't come anywhere close to La La Land, but it performed well enough where it was on people's radars consistently over the voting period. Now, if A Star Is Born doesn't really do like, if it goes below, I would say 25 this weekend, I think its awards contentions are going to be severely hurt. And that's just probably an indicator that people aren't that interested in that story for whatever reason. Now, October really, we just talked about the top October films. 2 of them were space movies, Gravity and The Martian. It feels like space month for whatever reason. So First Man really fits in there, but I don't know. I feel like the zeitgeist is turning in a different direction for some reason here. I was thinking maybe even 40, 45, 50 a couple weeks ago, but now... as movies come out and perform, it does absolutely change your perspective about what's coming out in the next few weeks and how they're going to perform. Like right now, I was like, okay, last week I was super stoked that Halloween was going to do like $70 million opening weekend, $60 million. But now that Venom has done so well, I feel like that's going to depress Halloween's opening. And maybe I'm wrong about that. But people do have limited funds. Like, it's not like people have unlimited money to go and see movies whenever they want to. So they make economic choices every time they go. So if Venom does double what it's probably supposed to do or should do, then I think that's eventually going to hurt movies over the next few weeks that people are going to go see, like Halloween. And I wonder if that's even going to hurt The First Man. I don't know. It's an interesting theory to think about. Like, I don't know. I need to take more economics classes or whatever. Even though I'm 36 years old. Never stop learning. So First Man, I'm kind of have mixed feelings on about right now. I think it's going to have great legs no matter what. But I think the opening is going to be a little bit closer to 30 than 35. Goosebumps 2 is also opening next weekend. People are really sleeping on that movie. I don't know why. Consensus was $13 million at the fall from HSX, Hollywood Stock Exchange. Now I have it at 16. Was my guess for the opening weekend. I feel like it's going to be like 20. Like, why not? I mean, it's Goosebumps 2. House with the Clock on Its Walls. I mean, it's so weird because Jack Black, I feel like he's supposed to be in Goosebumps movies now, but he's not in this one. And I don't really know children's, film marketing. I don't really watch Nickelodeon anymore, so I don't know what's going on with that. But I feel like it's Goosebumps. It's got the name. We're getting close to Halloween. We're only 3 weeks away from Halloween, so I feel like it's going to do about 20. Okay, so that's next week. After that is Halloween, which we've already talked about. I was thinking, earlier this year, at the start of the fall, I heard all the stories about this movie. I was thinking it's going to be 40, 45. Everybody was telling me I was an idiot, and now I feel like an idiot because I feel like it's going to open at 60 or 70, maybe even 80. But after Venom, I feel like, I don't know, people spent money on Venom. Are they going to spend another $12, $15 to go see Halloween on the 19th? Maybe they do. My guess right now for Halloween, I had originally had it at 30 at the start of the fall. So I don't know, that could happen, but it's probably not going to happen. I'm going to say probably 55 now. Hollywood Stock Exchange really slept on that movie. They had it at $13 million opening. And this is in September 1st when I read these numbers. That's not going to happen. It's going to be triple that at least, probably. Quadruple that. But the big question with Halloween is it going to have is it going to beat The Nun? Is it going to beat that $55 million opening mark? I don't think that it does, but there's some indication that it could really push up in the $60-70 million range for that one. Probably one of the biggest horror openings of all time. Maybe I think The Nun was number 2 all time, and It's number 1, which was what? I can't remember. 117 maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, so that is the next couple of weeks. Then we're getting into Hunter Killer, which I think is going to do okay. It comes out the 26th. Indivisible from Pureflix, Christian probably also the 26th. Johnny English Strikes Again. That's dead on arrival. No one's going to see that. Then we're into November, kind of getting close to holiday season. Bohemian Rhapsody, Nobody's Fool, Nutcracker comes out on the 2nd of November. Then Dr. Seuss, Girl with Spider's Web, Overlord on the 9th. Fantastic Beasts, Instant Family, Widows on the 16th. It's a strong back end to the year. I don't think there's a lot of things that are gonna. This isn't like anything's gonna break $100 million opening or anything like that. But like, there's gonna be a lot of mid-tier films that do well. Creed 2, Green Book, Ralph Breaks the Internet, Robin Hood are all on the 21st, and then we get into the last month of the year, which is usually quiet the first couple of weeks, then really takes off for Christmas. And so it'll be an exciting last couple of months, or last few months, I should say. The big one I'm looking forward to is Halloween. Maybe I'll do a special on Halloween, the opening weekend for that. Anyway, I will definitely be back next week, guys. Thanks for listening to the Wildline Podcast.